Apologies for the um, apologies for the delay. Um, at first, I'm going to tell you a bit about myself, and then I want to outline my journey to becoming a climate activist, which led to my arrest at home in November 2022 for conspiring to cause a public nuisance. People were going to be climbing into the M25 gantries. So on the way to do that, I want to make a short detour as I explain a bit about the purpose of nonviolent direct action. So I'll talk a bit about my book, Finding Beauty Behind Bars, a climate activist in forced retreat, that I've recently had published and that's got a foreword by Bishop Gavin Collins, Bishop of Dorchester. So the book's about issues of faith, the climate emergency and prison. Incidentally, I don't get any money from the book. My purpose for promoting it is to offer an honest and I hope accessible approach to how we get through what is to come. It's not definitive, it's just a tentative step, hopefully in the right direction. So you can buy it online from hive.co.uk for £10.50 or get it from any good bookshop. So actually, it's been endorsed by the former Conservative Minister, Jonathan Aitken. You may remember that he was in prison for perjury in 1999, and on his release he wrote several powerful spiritual books. He was later ordained in for a number of years he's been chaplain back in Pentonville prison where he served, and now in his 80s he's still there. So having read the book, he phoned me, and with one caveat that he said about my saying my approach to the Tory government at that time under Boris Johnson. I could hear him smiling when he said that. He said he'd be delighted to endorse it, and that if ever I found myself again in prison, and specifically in Pentonville, he'd give me a job in the chaplaincy immediately. So I'm keen not to take him up on that. So when I finish talking, I'm planning to talk for about 20 minutes. We'll have a time of question and discussion, and I hope that's going to be okay. So I'm 74 and I live not far from Swindon. And I'm a retired dentist and Church of England priest and a granddad, which is amazing and brings its own responsibilities. So, and I'm a village lad. I spent most of my childhood and youth around the river and in the fields around our home near Abingdon. I loved it. And as I got older, I felt closer to God in the natural world. I found it peaceful, a harmony, something deeply spiritual. I think it was the Catholic theologian John O'Donoghue who said, "If we walk on the earth with reverence, beauty will decide to trust us." So in retrospect, this was what I was learning from the natural world as a boy, as a man, and now as an old man. If we walk on the earth with reverence, beauty will decide to trust us. This is what nourishes me. This is what gives me joy. So over 20 years ago, I became increasingly alarmed about the climate emergency and the degradation of our beautiful, fragile and sacred planet. And I found this deeply distressing. And it made me feel isolated from friends and family, isolated from members of the church, from the church itself, and from everyone who didn't actually get it. Anyway, around 20 years ago, during a routine ministerial review that all clergy have, this one happened to be with my bishop at the time, Stephen Cottrell, I told him how alarmed I was at the developing climate and environmental crisis. And I said I felt I needed to be talking about it all the time, even in church, And he reacted by saying, "Then, Tim, I give you my permission to keep banging on about it." So I did. And in the following 15 years, I did all forms of the softly, softly approach, everything, but always with zero response. I wrote endlessly to my MP, to government ministers, county councillors, town councillors, heads of industry, TV personalities, investment companies and environmental media editors. I went on marches, protests, waved banners, did craftism, went on a mass lobby of MPs, wrote to leading health professionals, head teachers and school governing bodies, and always nothing. No change. Then 7 years ago, when Sir David Attenborough was People of the World's representative at COP24, he said of Greta Thunberg and her school strike that it represented for the first glimmer of hope that he'd seen for the planet. So I immediately joined Extinction Rebellion as the only group I knew who were doing a similar type of non-violent direct action, because I wanted to try to help fan that glimmer of hope into a flame. So I went on lots of actions, and I was arrested several times with Extinction Rebellion, with Insulate Britain, with Just Stop Oil, and with Christian Climate Action, while taking part in non-violent direct action. Now I want here to take a little detour for a couple of minutes to explain a bit about the purpose of non-violent direct action and to dispel a myth about it. We may know the rationale, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves. People say that non-violent direct action is counterproductive because it alienates the people we want to influence. This is a fundamental misunderstanding, and it's part of a media spin to detract from the message and to delay swift and meaningful action to mitigate the climate emergency. So non-violent direct action, NVDA, is not about winning hearts and minds, and that's never the intention. Winning hearts and minds is a long-term approach to change. This is the role of rallies, leafleting, educational programs, holding vigils and the like. This is what I've been doing for 15 years with no effect. No, NVDA is specifically intended to exert high-intensity political pressure to get swift and meaningful action. So it's aimed at governments, the movers and shakers. It's aimed at boardroom directors of fossil fuel companies, banks that invest in them, insurance companies that prop them up, governments who are afraid of them, and media moguls and lobbyists who promote the plundering of the earth and the archaic use of fossil fuels that is killing our planet. So this is the rationale of non-violent direct action, as I see it. So going back to my journey of activism, in 2021, I heard a talk about Insulate Britain. So insulating the country's housing stock was government policy for years, but never carried out. So the plan was to block the M25 over a period of 2 to 3 days to force the government to insulate social housing, which would end fuel poverty and be the quickest way to reduce carbon emissions. So thousands of people die from fuel poverty every year, and weighing the potential disruption against saving thousands of lives from fuel poverty and getting mass reduction in carbon emissions seemed to me entirely appropriate. You may not agree with this, but that's what I felt. So I felt I was being offered an important opportunity. They said it's not a perfect plan, it may not work. But I asked myself, what soldier goes into battle only if assured of success? Not a very committed one, I decided. So I remembered my Uncle Max, who, when he was 26 and the world was at war, was a soldier on D-Day. Well, now the world is not at war, not whole scale, but humanity itself is at risk. and the planet's in a mess. So I saw this as my time to live courageously as Max did. Not that I was being asked to risk my life, although I should be prepared to do that for the planet, shouldn't I? I was only being asked to carry out non-violent direct action. So I joined a team and I realized that I could trust the people I was with, all sorts of people, different ages, backgrounds, strengths and weaknesses, all looking out for each other, all with one united aim to get serious action to mitigate the climate chaos. So I was on several roadblocks. Sometimes it was a bit scary, but my overriding emotion was one of solidarity, getting energy from my team. So different from the feelings of isolation I'd had before. Incidentally, my team was of about 12 people. We were all in a safe house together. There was another Anglican priest, a Catholic priest, a Quaker, and a Buddhist. I also felt liberated from my grief from the planet, and I felt alive with what I can only describe as a new feeling of active hope. So being active for me was good for my mental well-being. Better for me than being on the sidelines. So the standout moment for me was junction 14 on the M25. I think quite a few people on the call might remember this. 8 a.m, lashing it down with rain. 40 of us, all wearing high-vis jackets, ran from undercover and swarmed up the embankment, over the barrier and onto the junction. The HGV drivers were blaring their horns to alert the police to us being there. The police were on us in seconds, but not in time to stop us. And I must confess, I felt exhilarated, which shocked me. Why was I exhilarated? Well, perhaps because I was one of 40 people acting in a well-organized unit, acting boldly for the planet, brothers and sisters together, right place, right time, what could be better? And whatever else we achieved that day, we kept the climate emergency in the headlines. I wish we were able to do that every day. It's where it should be, isn't it? So I've been describing my journey into becoming a climate activist. But the notion that life is something of a journey is shared by a lot of us, isn't it? For me, it resonates with the experience of a religious pilgrimage. And if we see our lives as a journey, we might see the climate and environmental crisis as a river in spate, a tumultuous flow that we must somehow cross. Talking about it like this makes it feel a bit like something from Pilgrim's Progress, which is fiction, which I've always found a bit dark. Well, these are dark times, and this is not fiction. Tempting that it is, we can't pretend it's not there. We absolutely have to approach it, and we have to get through it. So a couple of months ago, I heard an interview with the boxer Anthony Joshua. I warmed to him as he talked of his sincerity and his benevolence, until the moment the interviewer asked him about the morality of boxing in Saudi Arabia. It's where most of the big boxing events take place now. It's sports washing. Astonishingly, he asked what was wrong with Saudi. The interviewer told him of the human rights abuses and the violence against women, and again asked him how he could in all conscience box there. So he replied that he would do anything he could to support those affected. Anything that didn't damage his career. I was so shocked that this fearless boxer, when faced with a life-defining challenge, requiring all the integrity and courage he could muster. He bottled it. He put his career above everything else, including morality. We face our own, well, it's a universal, life-defining barrier of climate and the environmental emergency, don't we? Do we take the course of least resistance, like the boxer, and carry on regardless? Or do we try to live our lives courageously to find a way to deal with this apparently insurmountable barrier and help our loved ones face it too? So shortly before I was arrested at home on the last occasion, a priest friend of mine, ours in Christian Climate Action, she was giving a talk to recruitment talk for Just Stop Oil, and she started a talk with these three questions. Does the climate emergency keep you awake at night? Do you think we are stuffed? Actually, she might have used the F word. Do you carry superglue? Well, that's pretty much where I was, metaphorically, when I was arrested on that last occasion. I was really having difficulty seeing God's hand at work in the world. So in prison, and I was only in prison for a short time, I tried to focus on looking for signs of God's activity there. So my thinking was, if I could see his hand at work there, it must be active in the wider world. So I kept a journal, I looked carefully, and I noted what I saw and experienced. And on my release, I started trying to edit and refine it. I'm a bit dyslexic, so there's a lot of use of spell check and Grammarly. But I find it was all a cathartic process. Actually, Andrea was at the same time doing much the same through art, and it was finished up as a collaborative process. I tried to express the roller coaster of emotions that I felt, the despair, the generosity of spirit, the absurdity, and the laugh out loud, and actually there were a surprising number of those. What I wrote was not about wanting us all to be activists. It was about trying to stay focused, looking for God's presence in this period of rapid social and cultural change as a consequence of the climate and environmental breakdown. It was about finding beauty, beauty that would hopefully embrace me and refresh me. Could I find it? Could I find what gives me joy? If I could, I hope that it would help me develop emotional and spiritual resilience, even in prison. If I could, I hoped it would help me live appropriately when I was released. So I wanted to live courageously, trying to engage with aspects of the natural world that I could, to see its beauty and to be refreshed by it. So that's the premise of the book, Finding Beauty Behind Bars, a climate activist's enforced retreat, which I offer as a stepping stone as we step out across the torrent of uncertainty that we all face today. So who was it who said, when asked the way to a place, said, well, I wouldn't start from here. Well, this is not where any of us want to be. But here we are, and we need to get over this barrier. So, as I said, the book is about issues of faith, climate emergency, and environmental crisis, and it's about prison. So I'd just like to read you a little bit, if that's okay. The 11th of November 2022, Wormwood Scrubs Prison. The chaplain, a soft-spoken man who has an aura of quiet strength and wisdom, visits. I find him reassuring, empowering. He quotes the Desert Fathers, a group of Christians who, more than 1,500 years ago, lived in the deserts of the Middle East. Go into your cell, and your cell will teach you everything. It feels as if I'm in the presence of one of those Desert Fathers being instructed by him. This is quite a challenging and intense experience. So my task is to see my cell as a place of learning. I'm on remand and not sure how long for. It could be 6 months or a year before the trial. 6 p.m. I hear music. I'm expecting drum and bass and usually enjoy the energy it conveys, but no. Tonight, my first night in cell E235, somewhere distant on the landing, beautiful 1950s lounge music is playing. I wonder who's responsible. Perhaps it's a guy wearing a quilted smoking jacket, puffing quietly on a long cigarette holder. More likely a prisoner in a grey tracksuit vaping, imagining himself beyond the walls and the razor wire. But there's a delicious incongruity, and I savour the peacefulness that engulfs me until it fades away some hours later. Beauty does exist on Ewing. If someone has been praying for me, this is the answer. So my hope is that this little book may, even in only a tiny way, help towards a personal sense of transformation, to hold space, to use dialogue and empathy and open-heartedness. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a Native American and a botanist, said, "Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair because joy is what the earth gives me, and I must return that gift." So I hope you enjoyed reading the little book, and if you do, buy a copy for your friends. It's available online from hive.co.uk and in any good bookshop. And remember, there's nothing in it for me. I don't receive any money from it. I just want it to be used as a discussion point, as I hope we're going to do in a few minutes. And I want the message to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Yeah, so as I said, just to allow us to keep recording, if people stay muted but pop their questions into the chat. Yeah, and we've actually already got one, Tim. So are you ready to start taking questions? Is that good?
Yep, sure.
Yeah. So Jeff says, what does beauty will decide to trust us mean? Which is something you said quite early on.
I think the best example I can give of that is when I have a robin feeding from my hand. You know, the robin is a beautiful creature, you know, a fellow creature, a sibling, and there's a trust that gives me joy, you know, and I think that, you know, I've got rabbits in the garden. Andrea's not actually that keen on them because it eats her plants, but I quite like them because they're fellow creatures, and so I tiptoe out and see if I can find them in the morning, because I want to develop a sort of harmony with the natural world. We are creatures together, and I think we can be dissociated from that. We've distanced ourselves. We've ruptured that bond between the natural world and ourselves. And I want to, for myself, I find that reference from John O'Donoghue, I think it's John O'Donoghue, that there's a ring of authenticity. So that's the best answer I can give.
Mhm. Thank you. Do people have other questions they'd like to pop into the chat? Well, we were just soaking in what Tim said.
Well, I didn't realize I'd given quite a definitive answer to my thought.
Ah. So Sue says the question she always has for someone who's had this unique experience of prison for climate protest is whether the staff and other prisoners understand why you were there.
Yeah, good question. Yes, surprisingly, um, um, surprisingly, a lot of them do. You'll see in the book that there was one instant I mean, it's a taboo subject. You don't ask somebody in prison what they're in for. But actually, because I was a standout, you know, people did ask, and it's much better to answer than people to assume that you're a paedophile, and and that could be the assumption. So I was in a holding cell on one occasion, at 6:30 in the morning, about 25 guys in there. There's one guy with a hat on. I'm not quite sure how he got a hat, because you're not supposed to wear them in prison. And he was sort of holding court, and he shouted across to me. I kept my head down, and he said, "What are you in for?" And I said, I'm a climate protester with Just Stop Oil." And he said, "Hey man, we're all in prison because we've done stuff for ourselves. You're in prison because you're trying to do something for the planet. I take my hat off to you." And but when he asked the question, the room went absolutely quiet, dead silent, and it was a bit scary. And as soon as he did that, they all started talking again. So and yet, do you know, I I've been out of I was on a tag when I came out of on bail, and I went to the gym. I was trying to get fit, and the gym instructor saw my Extinction Rebellion tattoo, and he said, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's Extinction Rebellion." And he said, "Oh, what's that?" and and I said, "It's a climate protest." "Oh, what's that about?" And this intelligent young man, who I had all the advantages, my guess, of not being, but freedom, had no idea what was going on. And yet, a lot of the guys in the Nick that I came across knew perfectly well, and were in tune, and were concerned, and so on. Yeah.
Great. So we all just need to get an XR tattoo and the conversation will flow.
Well, yeah, it did save me on another occasion.
Gosh. So Mark says, thank you for the book. I love it. Do you feel grief at the loss? If so, how do you cope with it?
Yeah, I think planet grief, I don't think we ever get over it. I read recently somebody said that actually you was using the analogy of riding a bike, saying that you've got a whole you dealing with the grief is like getting balance on the bike, and the only way you can do that is by moving, by cycling. So that's being active, in whatever way you feel is appropriate. And so you need to be active to be able to deal with the grief, which helps balance the grief. I find that quite a useful metaphor. But it's an ongoing issue, and actually it's much easier to deal with people who get it than with a lot of friends and family who seem to get it but clearly aren't quite as they perhaps they haven't looked into the abyss. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Um, and Catherine says, did it make more sense to be on the gantry after you experienced that exhilaration of being in the right place at the right time and looking back on it than it did when you planned it?
Right. Okay. Well, I never got on the gantry. I mean, I was accused of training people to climb into the gantries, which is is mad. I've climbed once when I was 17 and I didn't like it. So quite how they got that idea, I've no idea. I was on a Zoom call which was infiltrated by a Sun reporter, and I was part, and there was an assumption made that I was part of the organization. But I never actually got into the gantry. But and when I've been on the M25 with Insulate Britain, um, I hadn't anticipated that sense of exhilaration, um, but actually, it was a sense of camaraderie, you know, working as a unit together that was really powerful.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. And did that make that action that you did with Insulate Britain make more sense afterwards than it did as you planned it?
Um, okay, no, because although as teams we felt that bond, the media had been mobilized by lobbyists um, and others to actually divert the message. So it was actually for, I think, pretty well for everyone who was involved in that, quite a tricky time. So
Mhm.
although it was the exhilaration was short-lived, maybe it was like a sort of athlete where you get a sort of something that sustains you at the time.
Mhm.
But actually, you can bottom out pretty quickly afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And anyone who's got their hand up, if you just want to stay muted because we're recording, but pop anything you want to say in the chat if you've got a question. Yeah. Um, so Maria says, do you feel conflicted stepping back from MVDA when the public in general and powers that be are still ignoring climate change?
Um, yes, is the short answer.
Mm.
The longer answer is when I got out, Andrea grabbed me by the proverbial lapels and said, "Don't you ever do that to me again." We were both laughing, but I mean, it's a demonstration that, you know, there's a mutual cost, you know, for loved ones, and you know, so we see ourselves, you know, very much as a team. So, um, you know, I still feel that I want to be part of stuff, but would I, would, is it mine to do? That's the question. There's a book written by Kimberly Hare. I think it's called At the Edge, and it's subtitled, "What is it mine to do, and who should I do it with?" And that's a question I think we need to be asking ourselves all the time. Currently, I want to be having these discussions, and I want to be especially speaking to church groups. You know, I want to get invitations to speak to church groups and help people make these tentative steps towards a deeper understanding of not necessarily the situation, but if you like, the psychology of why we put up defensive barriers and are afraid to face what's before us, and because of that, can't then live authentically and can't then be exemplified to our friends and families the best way to live.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Um, and we've also got Someone has said they don't know if this is the right place to ask, but how long did you stay in prison for, and what
Yeah,
for
it's the right place.
exactly?
Well, I'm open to any questions. Yeah, so it was, I applied for bail on two occasions and was turned down. Um, you only get three chances for bail. So on my third application, the my barrister who was assisting said that, you know, if it looked as if I was going to be turned down, that I'd be she'd withdraw the application rather than it be turned down.
Mhm.
And then when I went into the dock, the she came over to me again and said the prosecuting barrister is not going to oppose bail. So, which was great news. But then the judge reiterated at length why I hadn't received bail in the first place, and I thought he was going to I thought he was going to turn me down. But he then imposed stricter bail conditions than the prosecution were looking for. So it was 6 weeks, but until that day, I had no idea whether it was going to be 6 weeks, 6 months, or however long. So that was it was the uncertainty of it that was the most difficult bit to deal with. And I think that, you know, I think of people in prison now, and their sense of uncertainty is um, uh, is very tough to deal with.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Great. Has anyone got any more questions? Oh, I'll just read this one. Okay, so you've explained that the purpose of MVA is not to win hearts and minds. You said it was a myth that it alienates people. Do you not accept that it does alienate? And how do you rate the importance of hearts and minds? Doesn't NVDA give permission to others to hold the government to ransom?
I think we are at a stage in the environmental and climate crisis where we've got to throw everything at it. So it's not a question of doing one thing or the other. It's not a question about just voting the right people into office. It's not just about holding them to account. It's not just about protesting when things go wrong or writing on that. We've got to exert pressure on every front possible. So for me, it's not a question of either or. It's everything. You know, between all of us, we have to do everything at once. So hearts and minds is important. Yeah, of course it is. But I mean, that was important 20 years ago. And unfortunately, fossil fuel companies and media muted the climate scientists, which I've got a particular beef about. So I find that you know that had that not taken place, we may not be in this position now. So non-violent direct action, you know, it has to be done. I mean, because um, the the power that's exerted by elite, rich, the plutocrats, you know, is so powerful that you can see it today, you know, in what's happening in Gaza and so on. You know, have we actually got a democracy, a functional democracy? It's arguable, isn't it?
Mm.
And and so what else? What else can we use? I think that non-violent direct action is really important. We've got to try to do something to speak truth to power.
Yes. Thank you, Tim. That's powerful. Great. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
going
So I noticed that Maria's put in oil companies
to.
spent millions on undermining science and confusing the public. Absolutely right. I mean, they do everything they can to muddy the waters. Why wouldn't they? You know, they greenwash. You know, Shell's actually reduced the amount of revenue they put towards green, sustainable development. So yeah, the shock is though that it actually happens. How could people, presumably intelligent people, be driving us in this direction, totally oblivious of what that direction means? I can't understand that. But I think one of the things that have occurred to me recently that I found quite helpful is my approach now is, well, why wouldn't they do that? You know, if people are gripped by that sense of evil, why do you expect anything else? And I feel that that's very much the case. The world's in the grip of individuals who've got only themselves, their own interests at heart. How we deal with that, and where does theology intersect with that? That's what I struggle with, and maybe somebody here can give me a hand with that.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I'm going to switch off the recording now.